Hey everyone! So we're going to read chapters 16 and 17 today because I've been getting a little bit behind and I want you all to be able to be keeping up with this book. I've still got a little bit of a scratchy throat, so if I'm kind of clearing my throat or being a little bit quiet, I apologize. But yeah, so chapter 16. Hang on a second, I'm going to drink some of my coffee. Alrighty. The white man's ship did not return that spring or in the summer, but every day, whether I was on the headland or gathering shellfish on the rocks or working on my canoe, I watched for it. I also watched for the red ship of the Aleuts. I was not sure what I would do if the Aleuts came. I could hide in the cave, which I had stored for food. With food and water, for it was surrounded by thick brush, and the mouth of the ravine could only be reached by the sea. The Aleuts had not used the spring and did not know about it because there was another one closer to where they camped. But they might come upon the cave by chance, and then I must be ready to flee. For this reason, I worked on the canoe I had abandoned on the spit. I went to the place where the others were hidden, but they were dried out and cracked. Also, they were too heavy for a girl to push into the water, even a girl as strong as I was. The tides had almost buried the canoe, and I labored many days to dig it out of the sand. Since the weather was warm, I did not go back and forth to my house on the headland, but cooked my meals on the sandspit, and at night slept in the canoe, which saved much time. Even this canoe was too big for me to pull easily in and out of the water, so I set about making it smaller. I did this by loosening all the planks, by cutting the sinews and heating the pitch that bound them together. I then shaped these planks to half their length using sharp knives made from a black stone which is to be found at one place on the island, and bound them back together with fresh pitch and sinew. Blah, blah, blah. Sinew is a hard word to say sometimes. The canoe, when I had finished, was not so beautiful as it had been before, but I could now lift one end of it and drag it through the waves. All the time I was working on the canoe, which was most of that summer, Rontu was with me. He was either sleeping in the shade of the canoe or running up and down the sandspit chasing the pelicans that roost there in great numbers because there are numerous fish nearby. He never caught any of the birds, yet he would keep trying until his tongue hung out of his mouth. He had learned his name very quickly, and many words that meant something to him. Zalwit, for example, which is our word for pelican, and nayip, which means fish. I talked to him often using these words and many others that he did not understand, just as though I were talking to one of my people. Rontu, I would say, after he had stolen a special fish I had speared for my supper. Tell me, why is it that you are such a handsome dog and yet such a thief? He would put his head on one side and then the other, although he knew only two of the words, and look at me. Or I would say, it is a beautiful day. I have never seen the ocean so calm, and the sky looks like a blue shell. How long do you think these days will last? Rontu would look up at me just the same, although he understood none of the words, acting as if he did. Because of this, I was not lonely. I did not know how lonely I had been until I had Rontu to talk to. When the canoe was finished and the pitch had dried, I wanted to find out how it went through the water and if the planks leaked. So we set off on a long voyage around the island. The voyage took all of one day, from dawn until night. There are many sea caves on the island of blue dolphins, and some of them are large and go far back into the cliffs. One of these was near the headland where my house stood. The opening was narrow, not much wider than the canoe, but once we were inside, it spread out and was larger than my place on the headland. The walls were black and smooth and slanted far up over my head. The water was almost as black, except for where light came through the opening. Here it was a gold color, and you could see fish. You could see fish swimming around. They were different from the fish on the reefs, having larger eyes and fins that drifted out from their bodies like kelp. This place opened into another, which was smaller and so dark I could see nothing. It was very silent in there, with no sound of the waves on the shore and only the lapping of the water against the rocky walls. I thought of the god Tumai Yawit, who had become angry at Mukat and gone down, down into another world, and I wondered if it were not to such a place as this that he had gone. Far ahead was a spot of light, no larger than my hand, so instead of turning back, which I felt like doing, I drifted toward it around many turnings and came at last to another room, much like the first. Along one side was a wide shelf of rock, which ran out to the sea through a narrow opening. The tide was full, and yet the shelf was out of the water. It was a fine place to hide a canoe, which could be lifted out and stored there where no one could find it. The ledge joined the cliff, just below my house. All I needed was a trail down to the cave, and then the canoe would be close at hand. "We've made a great discovery," I said to Rontu. Rontu did not hear me. He was watching a devilfish just beyond the opening of the cave. This fish has a small head with eyes that bulge and many arms. All day, Rontu had been barking at cormorants, the seagulls, the seals, at everything that moved. Now he was quiet, watching the black thing in the water. I let the canoe drift along and knelt down out of sight until I could pick up my spear. The devilfish was in front of us, swimming slowly near the surface, moving all its arms at once. Large devilfish are dangerous if you are in the sea, for their arms are so long as a man, and they can quickly wrap them around you. They also have a big mouth and a sharp beak where their arms join their head. This one was the largest I had ever seen. Since Rontu was standing in front of me, I could not put the canoe into a better position, and I had to lean out to use the spear. As I did so, the devilfish saw my movement and let loose in the water a black cloud of liquid which instantly hid him from view. I knew that the devilfish would not be in the center of this cloud that he had left behind. I therefore did not aim my spear at it, but picked up the paddle and waited until he reappeared. He was now twice the length of the canoe from me, and though I paddled fast, I could not overtake him. "Rontu," I said, for he was watching the black cloud in the water, "you have much to learn about the devilfish." Rontu did not look at me or bark. He put his head to one side and then the other, still puzzled, more so when the cloud disappeared and nothing was left except clear water. Devilfish is the best food in the sea. The flesh is white and tender and very sweet, but they are difficult to catch without a special kind of spear, which I now decided to make during the winter when I would have much more time. I took the canoe to Coral Cove, not far from the cave, and pulled it out on the shore out of reach of the winter storms. There it would be safe until spring, when I would hide it in the cave that Rontu and I had found. It was easy to paddle and did not leak. I was very happy. Chapter 17. Storms came early with rain, and between the rains, fierce winds struck the island, filled the air with sand. During this time, I made myself another dress, but most of the days I spent fashioning a spear to catch the giant devilfish. I had seen this spear made, as I had seen my father make bows and arrows, yet I knew little about it, no more than I had about the others. Still, I remembered how it looked and how it was used. And from these memories, I made it after many errors and many hours of work, sitting on the floor while Rontu slept nearby and the storms beat upon the roof. 4 of the elephant seal teeth were left, and though I broke all except one, I worked down to a head with a barbed point. Then I made a ring and fastened it to the end of the shaft, and into this ring fit the head, and there was tied to it a long string made of braided sinew. And when the spear was thrown and struck a devilfish, the head came loose from the shaft. The shaft floated on the water, but the pointed barb was held by a string which was tied to your wrist. The spear was good because it could be thrown from a distance. On the first day of spring, I went down to Coral Cove with my new spear. I knew it was spring because that morning at dawn, the sky was filled with flocks of darting birds. They were small and black and came only at this time of year. They came out of the south and stayed for 2 suns, hunting food in the ravines, and then flew off in one great flight towards the north. Rontu did not go with me to the beach because I had let him out of the fence, and he had not returned. The wild dogs had been to my house many times that winter, and he had paid them no heed. But the night before, after they had come and gone, he had stood at the fence. He stood and whined and walked up and down. It worried me to see him act so strangely, and when he refused to eat, I finally let him out. Now I pushed the canoe into the water and drifted towards the reef where the devilfish lived. The water was so clear that it was like the air around me. Far down, the sea ferns moved as though a breeze were blowing them, and among them swam the devilfish, trailing their long arms. It was good to be on the sea after the winter storms, with the new spear in my hand, but all the morning as I hunted the giant devilfish, I kept thinking of Rontu. I should have been happy, yet thinking of him, I was not. Would he come back, I wondered, or had he gone to live with the wild dogs? Would he again be my enemy? If he were my enemy, I knew that I could never kill him, now that he had been my friend. When the sun was high, I hid the canoe in the cave where we had found. For once more, it was the time the Aleuts might return, and the 2 small bass I had speared, though not the devilfish, I went up the I went up the cliff. I had planned to make a trail from the cave to my house, but had decided that it could be seen from a ship and by anyone standing on the headland. The climb was steep. As I reached the top, I paused for breath. The morning was quiet, except for the noise of little birds flying from bush to bush and the cries of the gulls who did not like these strangers. Then I heard the sound of dogs fighting. The sound came from far off, perhaps from the ravine, and taking my bow and arrows, I hurried in that direction. I went down the path which led to the spring. There were tracks of the wild dogs around the spring, and among them I saw the large ones of Rontu. The tracks led away. Through the ravine which winds to the sea, I heard again the distant sounds of fighting. I went slowly through the ravine because of my bow and arrow. At last I came to the place where it opens into a meadow right at the edge of a low sea cliff. Sometimes in the summer, a long time ago, my people had lived here. They gathered shellfish on the rocks and ate them here, leaving the shells, which after many summers had formed a mound. Over this grass had grown, and a thick-leaved plant called gnap. On this mound, among the grasses and the plants, stood Rontu. He stood facing me with his back to the sea cliff. In front of him, a half circle, were the wild dogs. At first I thought that the pack had driven him there against the cliff and were getting ready to attack him. But I soon saw that two dogs stood out from the rest of the pack between it and Rontu, and that their muzzles were wet with blood. One of these dogs was the leader who had taken Rontu's place when he had come to live with me. The other one, which was spotted, I had never seen. The battle was between Rontu and these 2 dogs, and the rest were there to fall upon whichever was beaten. So great was the noise made by the pack. They had not heard me as I came up through the brush, nor did they see me now as I stood at the edge of the meadow. They sat on their haunches and barked with their eyes fixed on the others. But I was sure that Rontu knew I was somewhere near, for he raised his head and smelled the air. The 2 dogs were trotting back and forth along the mound watching Rontu. The fight had probably started in the spring, and they had stalked him to this place where he had chosen to fight. The sea cliff was behind him, and they could not reach him from that direction, so they were trying to think of some other way. It would have been easier if one of them had attacked him from the back and the other one from the front. Rontu did not move from where he stood at the top of the mound. Now and again he lowered his head to lick a wound on his leg, but whenever he did, he always kept his eyes on the 2 dogs trotting up and down. I could have shot them, for they were within reach of my bow, or driven off the pack. Yet I stood in the brush and watched. This was a battle between them and Rontu. If I stopped it, they would surely fight again, perhaps at some other place less favorable to him. Rontu again licked his wounds, and this time he did not watch the 2 dogs moving slowly past the mound. I thought it was a lure, and so it proved to be, for suddenly they ran towards him. They came from opposite sides of the mound, ears laid back, teeth bared. Rontu did not wait for the attack, but, leaping at the nearer one, turned his shoulder, and with his head lowered, caught the dog's foreleg. The pack was quiet. In the silence, I could hear the sound of the bone breaking. The dog backed away on 3 legs. The spotted dog had reached the top of the mound. Whirling away from the one he had crippled, Rontu faced him, but not in time to fend off the first heavy rush. Teeth slashed at his throat and, as he turned his body, struck him instead on the flank, and he went down. At that moment, while he lay there on the grass with the dogs circling warily and the pack moving slowly towards him, without knowing that I did so, I fitted an arrow to the bow. A good distance separated Rontu from his attacker, and I could end the battle before he was wounded further or the pack fell upon him. Yet, as before, I did not send the arrow. The spotted dog paused, turned in his tracks, and again leapt, this time from behind. Rontu was still lying in the grass with his paws under him, and I thought that he did not see that this other was upon him. But crouching there, he suddenly raised himself up at the same time, fastened his teeth in the other dog's throat. Together they rolled off the mound, yet Rontu did not let go. The pack sat restless in the grass. In a short time, Rontu rose to his feet, left the spotted dog where it lay. He walked to the top of the mound, lifted his head, and gave a long howl. I had never heard this sound before. It was the sound of many things that I did not understand. He trotted past me and up the ravine, and when I got to the house, he was there waiting, as if he had not been away or nothing had happened. And all the time he lived, Rontu never left again, and the wild dogs, which for some reason divided into 2 packs, after that never returned to the headland.